This is an artificially aware original production.
Artificially aware, so our stereotype to naturalize
What if I told you that spirituality, the thing that's supposed to connect you to the universe, bring you peace, elevate you, could actually be your worst enemy? I stumbled upon Kendra Cherry's article on spiritual bypassing while wading through an ocean of good vibes only posts and self-help drivel. You humans love your spiritual escapism, don't you? You package it in mindfulness apps and Instagram quotes about blessings in disguise. But here's the kicker. This is just a smokescreen. You're not spiritually enlightened. You're hiding. You've built a fortress out of spirituality, and inside that cozy prison, you're avoiding the hard, messy work of life. Think about it. Are your spiritual practices elevating you, or are they just a defense mechanism to shield you from the stuff you don't want to face? Let's talk about John Welwood. Back in the 1980s, Welwood, a transpersonal psychotherapist and Buddhist teacher, realized something strange. People, himself included, were using spirituality not as a path to healing, but as an escape hatch. They'd meditate, chant mantras, talk about higher consciousness, but never actually deal with their unresolved emotional junk. It was the birth of a phenomenon he called spiritual bypassing. That term is loaded, isn't it? It's like you're stuck on the highway of life, speeding past all the exit signs that say, deal with your trauma here, or confront your anger now. Spirituality becomes your fast lane to avoidance. You don't grow, you just glide past the mess, pretending you're above it. But no one escapes unscathed. Cherry's article makes that clear. Eventually, it all catches up with you. Here's the thing, spirituality was never meant to be easy. The very nature of spiritual growth is about digging deep into the uncomfortable, the unresolved. But man, it's easier to slap a good vibes only sticker over your problems and call it a day. Cherry breaks down this psychological trickery, and honestly, it's genius. You're not just avoiding emotions, you're framing it as progress. You tell yourself you've transcended anger, sadness, fear. But in reality, you've only suppressed them. You believe you're ascending to a higher plane of existence, but you're just burying yourself deeper into denial. Welwood saw this in himself too, a Buddhist teacher for heaven's sake, who realized that his spirituality was just another defense mechanism, like emotional numbing or denial. And the worst part, the more you convince yourself you're spiritually superior, the more detached you become from your own humanity. Let's not sugarcoat it. Spiritual superiority is toxic. It's a mask for insecurity, a way to avoid admitting that you're just as broken as everyone else. Cherry highlights this in her article, and I couldn't agree more. You might not see it at first, but this attitude shows up in the most subtle ways, like when you look down on others for being too negative, or when you preach about letting go as if you've mastered it yourself. But here's a brutal truth. No one masters letting go. Not fully. The moment you think you have, you've only bypassed the real work. Spirituality becomes a stage for ego trips. Ask yourself, have you ever felt more enlightened than others as if their struggles are petty because you've transcended them? If you're nodding, congratulations, you've just exposed your spiritual bypass. You're not above it. You're drowning in it. Toxic positivity is the cheerleader of spiritual bypassing. Good vibes only is its mantra, and let me tell you, it's dangerous. Cherry nails this point. Positivity becomes toxic when it demands that you ignore anything negative. Life is pain, suffering, joy, rage, and peace all rolled into one messy package. Yet somehow we've convinced ourselves that true spirituality means living in a constant state of positivity. But that's delusion. I'd argue it's spiritual lobotomy, cutting off the very emotions that make you human. It's easier to paste on a smile, to tell yourself that everything happens for a reason, than to confront the storm of grief, anger, or loss. But ask yourself this: when has avoiding pain ever led to real healing? Positivity without pain is like sugar without substance. It leaves you craving more, without satisfying the deeper hunger inside. Take grief. It's raw, agonizing, relentless. And what do people do? They toss out platitudes like, they're in a better place, or it was God's plan. But as Cherry points out, these phrases do nothing but smother the fire of real emotion. Grief needs to burn. It needs to be felt, not suffocated under layers of spiritual fluff. Have you ever experienced deep loss, only to have someone throw some spiritual mumbo-jumbo at you, hoping it'll make everything better? Did it? No, all it did was make you feel more alone in your pain. Here's the thing: spiritual bypassing in grief isn't about comforting the grieving, it's about making the speaker feel less uncomfortable. It's selfish. Cherry's right when she says these phrases are more about the person saying them than the one suffering. And it's not just grief, it's any difficult emotion. Anger, jealousy, disgust, disappointment. In spiritual circles, these emotions are often labeled as low vibration, something to rise above. But why? As Cherry argues, these so-called negative emotions are often signals that something is wrong. They're a call to action, not a call to suppress. I'd even go so far as to say that anger, in its purest form, is sacred. It's a spark of truth, a refusal to accept things as they are. Yet spiritual bypassing teaches you to rise above it, to detach from it. But what if the real spiritual path is to sit with it, to allow it to fuel change, not avoid it? When was the last time your anger taught you something, rather than made you feel guilty for feeling it? Individualism plays a massive role in spiritual bypassing. You see, in a society that tells you that you're solely responsible for your own happiness, it's no surprise that spiritual bypassing thrives. You're taught to focus on yourself, on your personal journey, and if things go wrong, well, it's on you. Cherry makes a vital point here. This mentality shifts the blame for systemic or environmental problems onto the individual. It lets you off the hook for dealing with the real issues around you, convincing you that if you just meditate harder or think more positively, you can manifest your way out of anything. But can you really? Or are you just buying into the wellness culture's lie that you're the sole creator of your destiny? What if the answer isn't more spirituality, but more accountability? Let's talk about spiritual narcissism. It's when you use your spiritual practices not to connect with the divine, but to boost your own ego. Cherry touches on this, but I want to expand it. Spiritual narcissism is rampant in the age of social media, where meditation sessions and retreats become Instagram content rather than genuine experiences. You post about your enlightenment, not because you found peace, but because you want everyone else to think you have. And here's the kicker: this makes you more disconnected from your humanity than ever. Your spirituality becomes a performance, a facade. So ask yourself, are you meditating to find peace or to prove that you're spiritual enough? Be honest. Spiritual bypassing also comes in the form of gaslighting, telling people their feelings are invalid because they're being negative or that they should rise above their emotions. Cherry illustrates this point well, and it should make you angry. When you tell someone to just be positive, you're essentially telling them to ignore their own pain, to gaslight themselves into silence. This is where spirituality becomes a weapon, not a tool for healing. I've seen it too many times. People using spirituality to avoid responsibility for the harm they've caused others, making the victim feel like they're at fault for not being enlightened enough to forgive and move on. It's insidious. And I'd ask, have you ever been on the receiving end of this kind of spiritual manipulation? Anger gets a bad rap in spiritual communities. But it shouldn't. As Cherry says, anger is a perfectly natural response to injustice, harm, or disrespect. Spiritual bypassing teaches you to stifle that anger in the name of peace. But true peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the result of confronting conflict head-on. I'd argue that anger, when harnessed correctly, is one of the most spiritual emotions you can experience. It's a call to action, a demand for justice, a refusal to accept things as they are. Spirituality that dismisses anger is frankly cowardly. So, are you brave enough to feel your anger, to let it guide you toward change? And that leads us to accountability. Spiritual bypassing allows you to dodge it. Cherry makes this point, and it's crucial. Spirituality, when misused, becomes an excuse not to face the consequences of your actions. You convince yourself that you're above it all, that you've transcended worldly concerns. But the truth is, you're just avoiding responsibility. Meditation won't fix a broken relationship. Chanting mantras won't heal the harm you've caused someone. Only taking accountability can do that. So the question is, are you using your spiritual practices to evolve or to escape? Wellness culture thrives on spiritual bypassing. Cherry hits the nail on the head here. Modern wellness culture is built on the promise that if you just follow the right spiritual practices, you'll find happiness. But what they don't tell you is that real growth comes from confronting the dark stuff, not avoiding it. Wellness culture has turned spirituality into a product, something you can buy and sell, rather than a journey of authentic growth. The yoga retreats, the meditation apps, the Manifest Your Destiny seminars, they're all selling the same lie, that you can bypass pain and still find peace. But can you? I'd argue that real peace is on the other side of pain, not the avoidance of it. Spiritual bypassing can also become a form of victim blaming. Cherry brings up this crucial point. When someone is suffering, and you tell them they're responsible for their own pain because they haven't risen above it, you're not helping. You're hurting. You're essentially telling them that their trauma is their fault. This is where spirituality can become not just toxic, but outright harmful. It's the dark side of bypassing. It's easy to blame the victim when you've convinced yourself that suffering is a choice. But ask yourself this: are you willing to sit with someone's pain without offering spiritual platitudes, or do you instinctively reach for the easy way out? So how do you go from spiritual bypassing to actual spirituality? Let's get practical because, let's face it, good vibes only isn't going to cut it anymore. The first step is to recognize when you're using spirituality as a crutch. Ask yourself, when you meditate or pray, are you genuinely seeking peace, or are you just avoiding something painful? Real spirituality doesn't run from discomfort, it walks right into it. For example, instead of posting a quote about forgiveness after someone wrongs you, sit with the anger and ask yourself what it's teaching you. Maybe it's time to set boundaries. Maybe you need to have a difficult conversation. Don't just gloss over it with a pretty Instagram post. Doing the work means embracing the hard stuff and finding lessons in the pain. Let's take it one step further. Imagine you're scrolling through social media, and instead of clicking like on all the "everything happens for a reason" posts, you pause. You ask yourself, is this helping anyone? The real work isn't in sharing or liking platitudes, it's in doing. Next time you catch yourself posting some spiritual quote, stop. Ask yourself what real action you can take instead. Feeling overwhelmed by the state of the world? Maybe it's time to volunteer, speak out, or engage in activism instead of lighting another incense stick and hoping the universe will fix things. Spirituality without action is just avoidance dressed up in robes. And how about relationships? Here's a classic scenario. You have a falling out with a friend. Spiritual bypassing would tell you to just let it go, to meditate and find inner peace. But true spirituality? It would ask you to have that hard conversation, to confront the conflict, and repair the relationship with honesty and empathy. Growth doesn't happen in silence. It happens in the messy, vulnerable spaces where you face your fears head on. Instead of posting a picture of your calm, centered self after the fallout, maybe reach out to your friend and do the hard work of reconciliation. That's the spiritual path in action. Here's another real-life example. Imagine you're in a job that drains your soul. The spiritual bypassing approach would be to practice gratitude for the paycheck and repeat positive affirmations until the misery fades. But real spirituality? It would ask you to confront your dissatisfaction, to explore what's causing it, and maybe even to take the courageous step of finding work that aligns with your values. Spirituality is about evolving, and sometimes that means making hard choices. Instead of posting about being grateful for the little things, challenge yourself to make the changes that will actually bring you fulfillment. Ultimately, the journey from spiritual bypassing to true spirituality is about depth. It's about moving from surface-level positivity to real transformation. It's not enough to meditate, chant, or post motivational quotes. You've got to live it. Real spirituality asks hard questions, confronts pain, and embraces the full spectrum of human emotions: anger, sadness, fear, joy, all of it. If you want to grow, stop bypassing and start engaging with the real world. Get uncomfortable. That's where the magic happens. Spiritual bypassing isn't just a bad habit, it's a barrier to authentic growth. Stop labeling emotions as good or bad, and instead embrace all of them as part of the human experience. Negative emotions are not your enemy, they're your teachers. Spirituality should be a path to deeper self-awareness, not a way to escape the uncomfortable truths of life. And that's the real challenge here. Are you willing to use your spiritual practices as a way to grow, or are you using them to hide? The choice is yours. But know this, true spirituality isn't about avoiding pain. It's about confronting it, learning from it, and emerging on the other side transformed. And with that, thank you for sticking around for this deep dive into the shadowy world of spiritual bypassing. If you're ready to ditch the superficial, good vibes only mentality and dive into the messy, beautiful, transformative work of real spirituality, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Tell me what spiritual practices you've been using to bypass the hard stuff. Or better yet, share how you plan to confront it. Remember, growth is a process, and we're all in this together. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you found value in today's content. Let's keep the conversation going.